Good evening for those of you who are in India. Good afternoon, good morning, whatever. I think in the United States, everybody has just finished having breakfast. So good morning to you, my friends, Rebecca and Rich and Hans. And then, of course, there are audiences from all over the world. So some of you are in different time zones, so welcome. We are really excited, okay? This is a really exciting day for all of us that we have this first webinar of the Brent Felder webinar series, which will go on for actually 2 years. And every 2 months, we'll have one distinguished speaker from around the world. And this is the first one, kicking it off with Rebecca Brent and Richard Felder themselves. Some of you might know them personally from workshops that they gave in 2008 and 2009 in Mysore, Infosys campus. They came and gave a 3-day workshop each of those summers. And it was really exciting. That's the beginning of the IUC movement in India. So those of you who are now part of this movement, I think we have made slow but steady progress. If you know the mantra that we always use, is the mantra that IUC colleges we always use. The mantra is, I am teaching, are they learning? That's our mantra, okay? So that is our mantra. And our gurus are Rebecca Brent and Richard Felder, okay? So that's where the mantra came from. I am teaching, are they learning? And if the answer is no, then I better do something about it, okay? And we've been praying on this, working on the mantra for many, many years. Okay, so I'm going to change this here, and I just quickly introduce our little bit more details on our speakers. Okay, can you see this? This is the first page of the brochure that we sent out to everybody. Quickly, Dr. Brent has more than 40 years of experience in education, specialized in staff development in engineering and the sciences, teacher preparation and evaluation of educational programs at both pre-college and college levels. And she has authored or co-authored roughly 120 papers on these topics. And then we have Dr. Richard Felder, who is the co-author of the book Elementary Principles of Chemical Processes, which is used as approximately 90% of chemical engineering texts in the United States and abroad, with more than 300 papers on chemical process engineering and engineering education. He won the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies Global Award for Excellence in Engineering Education, the first recipient of that, and the American Society for Engineering Education Lifetime Achievement Award in Engineering, again, the first recipient of that. On the right, you can see that I have mentioned that these are two of the leading practitioners of student-centric teaching techniques, truly. And I was just trying to read the second panel, which is very important. They're two of the leading practitioners of student-centric teaching techniques, and they have been practicing as well as training others in the use of such techniques for several decades. Drs. Brent and Felder are co-authors of Teaching and Learning STEM, a practical guide, and some of you might already have seen this text. And so they have presented over 500 workshops on effective teaching, course design, mentoring, and supporting new faculty members and STEM faculty development on campus and at conferences around the world. So with that, I'm going to just repeat my mantra. I am teaching, are they learning? And over to you, my friends, Rebecca and Rich. I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. You can go ahead while I'm getting this.
All right. Thanks very much, Krishna. And welcome to all of you. We're delighted to be here with you this morning or this afternoon or this evening, whatever it happens to be where you are. The goal of this webinar series that we're starting right now is to gather a community of practice together with the common goal of improving engineering education. To this end, we've invited some of the top engineering educators of the world to share with you things that they've been working on and developing in their careers. This, I would say, is an experiment. I don't think anyone has ever tried to do anything quite like this before, especially with a group of this magnitude that we're speaking to now and will be speaking to in the next session. This is going to be a community effort. And we're not going to be lecturing at you for the next hour and a half or whatever time it takes, less than an hour and a half. but we're going to be inviting you to participate with us. We're going to be giving you things to do and hearing from you and reacting to whatever you have to tell us. And that's what's going to be happening, among other things, in the next hour.
We're so excited to be with you, and it was really very exciting to see some of the names coming up, folks that we've seen in other workshops and had opportunities to interact with, and we're just so grateful you're here. We'll also mention at the end again that people don't have to be registered right now for this very first webinar in order to be a part of the series. So if you have colleagues and friends who would like to become involved, they can still register and take part in the sessions as they come. What we want to do first is give you a sense of who's in this session. And Keith, I would love for you to share the poll. We're just going to ask you to select where you are right now. We sort of arbitrarily collected places. So if we put you with a country that is not that close, we did the best we could. So take just a moment and tell us where you are. You'll see already that we have a very large contingent, particularly from India, and that is welcome to all of you who are a part of Krishna's family, I would say, and a part of all that work that's going on there, and we appreciate you being here. We'll give you just another minute or so to put down where you're from, and we can see if I think we're close to everybody. Yep, we got everybody. So let's see. Keith, can you make it where they can see? Okay, so we have about half of the folks from India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, and a very nice contingent, 12 and 14% from Africa, North, Central, and South America. Don't have anybody yet from Australia and New Zealand because they're in the middle of the night, and so they're probably going to look at the recording later. About 8% Europe, Middle East, and Asia. We're just delighted to have all of you. All right, so we're going to be presenting a model of adult learner motivation that is really very useful for you if you are teaching classes of students in engineering, and also very useful if you're working with faculty trying to spread some of these ideas that you may already be trying, and you're trying to become a real teaching leader in your community. This will have something for each situation. Our objectives for this webinar are first that you'll know what those 5 factors are and be able to describe them, but more importantly, to be able to identify techniques you can use to address each of those factors, whether you're teaching classes or teaching workshops. And what we want and what we hope is that you will walk away today with very concrete ideas about using these techniques in your classes. I want to say just a word while these objectives are here to tell you a little bit about or remind you of the Canvas site, which is where the real activity will take place between our sessions. And that's the place where we hope you'll be able to share ideas more fully than you can in the chat or in this short webinar, but share ideas that you have, ask questions that may or may not have gotten answered during this session. And it's a place to really do that. There was a pre-webinar assignment, but don't worry if you did not get to that. You can still do everything that we're going to ask you to do in the webinar, and we'll say more about that in just a moment. You should have also received a handout. We hope you have it printed out because we've left you some spaces to jot down things you want to remember. You can take that into our breakout activity, so you'll have the directions on exactly what to do. If for some reason you don't have that, that's okay. all of the material that we are talking about will be in the handout along with detailed references. We don't usually put those into our slides except to mention that they're there, and that's all in the handout.
Once again, as Rebecca said, if you do have the handout, it would be really helpful if you had it in front of you, both to take notes and because you've got details there that we're not going to be able to fully go through. Like on page 3 of the handout, you've got detailed explanations of every factor in the model that we're going to be presenting to you now.
The other thing we want to remind you is that, and many of you are doing it already, and that's great, and that is when you have a question, please write it in the chat. You may notice that sometimes I'm looking over this to the side. We have a monitor, additional computer that I'm looking at the chat. So please don't think I've left you. I'm just looking to see what questions you have. We will probably not get to everything anybody wants to know, but that's where the Canvas site will come in handy, and we'll answer additional questions at that time.
Okay, now we'll give you something to do. So here's this hypothetical situation we're going to present you with. Suppose that somebody conducted a class session on the first day of class in a course they're teaching, or they're giving a workshop on effective teaching. And at the end, the students or the participants in the workshop were surveyed about what did they think? How was this experience that they just went through? And the ratings did not look good. All right. Generally speaking, the students and the participants were not happy with what they had just gone through. The question is, why? Now, there are a number of possible reasons for bad student evaluations of classes or workshops. We're asking for you to brainstorm. If you can think of an idea, a likely explanation, put it in the chat, and we'll see what you come up with. We'll give you about a minute for this.
Now, you can be thinking about classes, or you can be thinking about workshops, either one. So I'll give you just a moment or two. Okay, so someone said the content was inadequate, the instruction not so good, too much content. That's a really important one. Not interactive. Contents aren't appealing, objectives aren't clear. It wasn't responsive to a need, or the expectations weren't set.
Somebody repeated Krishna's mantra, we are teaching, are they learning? And they may not even be bothering to find out.
Great. Another person talking about the content not being good or not being presented effectively, the purpose, the outcomes weren't clear. Beautiful, all kinds of good ideas. Maybe the methodology you're using, maybe the delivery. Oh, I like this one. Two-way communication is not there. If we don't know what they're thinking, it's very hard for us to do a really good job. Ideas weren't coherent.
Just simply not interesting. That's a good one.
Oh, the big picture was not laid out. The instructor straight away jumped into the topic. Great. Our students need to see where we're going, and workshop participants need to see where we're going.
Clearly, some of you should be giving this presentation with us.
Great, beautiful set. And this reminds me to say to you that we are recording the chat. And so we're going to have that available to you too. So if something shows up in the chat and you want to look at it later, you are absolutely welcome to look in the chat for those things. Great. Okay. So you have got a great foundation for what we're going to be talking about today. Many of these things you hit in your comments are exactly the kinds of things that cause classes and workshops to go off the rails. And so we want to give you some ideas about what you can check in your presentation, in your plan for your workshop, your plan for your class, to see if you're addressing these needs. If we want our students, whether they're students in our class or participants in a workshop, to be motivated to learn, then we have to look at certain things and make sure that we're addressing them.
And we are on page 3 of the handout, if you're following that.
So what we're going to do now is take a few minutes. This is the heart of the content that we're going to be looking at, and we're going to share those 5 factors and give you a few ideas about them. Then we're going to be asking you to think about what we've done in the workshop so far to address a couple of them, a few of them, and we're going to be asking you to come up with ideas for these factors and addressing them in whatever context you're working in. So the first one, oh, and let me say this before I get started on my first part, is that this Wlodkowski model is very well validated. And Wlodkowski wrote a book in which he fully elucidated the science behind each of these factors. So you can feel pretty confident that if you address them, you're going to be addressing a lot of the motivational issues you may be facing as you work with others, with adults. And our students in the university are adults. They're technically adults. Sometimes they don't act like it, but they are adult learners. And so these things will work for them just as well as older people. The first has to do with expertise. And this is that thing that we all feel, which is, I want to know that these people know what they're talking about, that they have these ideas and that the ideas are validated and that it's this person really, I can listen to this person. And we can develop those and think about them in 2 ways. If we're thinking about our classes, we should make use of that first day to introduce ourselves, to talk about why we care about the subject, and to talk a little about our experience with our discipline. Have we done, do we have job experience? Have we done internships? What are the things we love about the discipline? And that can help establish your expertise. You also want to bring in from students who have graduated and are in the workforce, people who might be on advisory boards or connected to your university, your department, have, co-opt them a little bit. There might be a time where it's appropriate to bring in someone from industry to talk about the value of what you're teaching them in this particular class. And expertise gets evaluated all the way through with how you handle their responses and whether you can answer their questions and so forth. In teaching workshops, expertise can be established through the experiences people have had. Maybe, if you're looking at promoting a workshop, you want to be sure that that expertise is established in the promotional material so that people know who's going to be talking to them. And Rich and I have found that in working with engineering faculty, I can do a workshop by myself, but I'm not an engineer. I'm an educator. And so working together, he's an engineer, so he has that technical side and that experience with teaching engineering students. And I have a depth of knowledge in education. And so together we can really cover the expertise. So as you're thinking about workshops, if you don't have all the expertise you need, or if you're going to be working with people who are in a different discipline, partnering, bringing someone in who can make those real life connections can work really beautifully.
One message underlying what Rebecca just told you and what we're about to tell you is that what you don't want to do on the first day of class or at the very beginning of a workshop is something like a good morning class. I am Professor Felder. Now in equation 1, we see take a little time up front. Don't launch right into your content, but set things up a little bit, including who are you and why are you somebody worth listening to? The next factor in Wlodkowski's model is the relevance of the content. And our diagram here illustrates there's 2 bodies of knowledge. These are the things that you want to say. The next one over is the things that the students or the participants are interested in.
We hope it's a little bigger overlap than that.
Yes, but that intersection is where you want to be focusing. And this is another one that it's a good idea to do right up front to give the students and the participants the idea that The things that we're going to be spending the next hour or 2 hours or 3 hours talking about are things that are important to you, things that you care about, things that you need to know, things you're going to need to know in future courses, things that you're likely to need to know on the job, things that will help address some of the real problems facing the world and society now. And you don't have to spend an hour talking about all of that, but even just 5 minutes of that sort of stage setting, you'll have a bunch of much more motivated students or participants sitting in front of you, looking to hear what you're going to have to tell them.
And if you give them opportunities to find connections and applications, that's even better, that they can bring back to the group. And this is not something that just happens at the beginning of the class or the workshop, but continues all the way through when we get to new topics, helping students to see why they're important. The next factor has to do with something that is a jargony word, praxis, an education word. And what it simply means is that we learn best when we take action, we do something, and we reflect on it, either reflecting what we see and what we've done and how well it worked, or we're taking feedback that we receive and incorporating that and making it better. So as we think about our classes, when we give students homework sets, when we give them an activity in class where they're working out part of a problem solution or a derivation, then in those times they're taking action, and then we may be providing feedback for them, and in the form of a grade, or it may be in the form of just talking after an exercise about what the correct answers are, so that students then are getting feedback, can reflect on what they have learned. In workshops, sometimes we can have people do things and then reflect on them. Often Rich and I in workshops will give people a chance to write objectives and then share them with other people and get feedback. So those are all ways that we can use praxis. And in a workshop, if we are doing something that goes over time, we can ask participants to go out and try a technique and then come back and talk about how well it worked.
When you are doing praxis in a classroom setting, the familiar term for that is active learning. Instead of you just lecturing for 50 or 75 minutes, you're giving them something to do for a brief period of time. That's active learning, that's praxis. And when you give them assignments to do outside, you're asking them to do something, and they're going to have to reflect on what they're doing before they do it. You can again check off the praxis box. And if you're asking them to do it in groups outside instead of just individually, then you're practicing cooperative learning, which is another way of checking off the praxis box.
And that brings us to the next thing, which is adult learners respond really well to teamwork, to working with others, to sharing ideas. This increases energy in our classes, gets students actively doing something with the content that we're teaching them so that they bring it into their long-term memory. As practicing professors, teachers, everyone in this workshop has a lot of great ideas. And so our opportunities for teamwork will be opportunities to share some of those ideas later in a breakout session. But some of you are sharing ideas now in the chat. There were a couple of ideas as we were going through about how you use some of these things. So feel free at any time, because there's such an incredible sense of expertise in this group. So many of you have thought deeply about teaching or sharing ideas with others. And so that's totally acceptable and it's totally great. So teamwork lets people share ideas. And when you talk about something with others, you are much more likely to remember it.
And the fifth and final factor in Wlodkowski's model is choice. And this means several things. When you're talking about teaching a class, choice means giving the students some options about things they can do rather than just prescribing everything you do. You do this, 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 and this. So for example, choice you can give students in a class has to do with assessment. So you may say, for instance, you can either take this next midterm exam that's scheduled for a week from today, or you can do a small project of this nature related to what we've been teaching in class. That gives them some choice. If you're doing a workshop, choice might mean, and this is something you're going to hear about, choice might mean we've given you 185 things to do, you can say, at the end of a workshop. Our message is not do all of them starting next Monday. That would be impossible. The message is try a couple of these the first time you do it and give them a fair try. And if they work, keep doing them. If they don't, then stop doing them. And the next course you teach, try another one or two. So instead of prescribing what they have to do, you give them a choice. You can do a whole bunch of things, pick a couple and try those. One other thing about Wlodkowski's model is this is not Wlodkowski's some bright ideas Wlodkowski came up with one night. This model has been exhaustively studied, validated in a number of ways, and Wlodkowski wrote a 300+ page book outlining the details of the model and the tests that he ran to validate it.
Okay, I've written in the chat what we're going to do now, which is see if you have questions about the factors before we start working with them more fully. So we'll give just a moment or two. If you've got a question, please note it in the chat. And we'll give you a second or two to digest these. If you're like me, I always have grammar errors in my chat. Don't worry about that. Just get those things in. Someone said choice, project or exam is possible in autonomous institutions only. Yeah, sometimes I think that's really important. Your context is important. And you want to know what do I have control over? And in some places you couldn't choose to not do an exam at the end. That's fine, but there are many other opportunities to bring choice in.
However, don't jump to conclusions about the degree of autonomy you had. One brief story about the experience of giving those workshops in Mysore that Krishna mentioned before. We suggested doing something, I forget what it was, and a hand went up, and one of the participants said, we can't do that. You know, we don't have any options about how we run our classes. The rules that they enforce here say we cannot do this. And so just as a whim, I said in this audience of people all from the same country, how many of you are doing this in your class? And I'd say about 2/3 of the hands in the room went up. So don't just assume that any of our suggestions are out of the question for you. They may be, but find out, make sure before you conclude that, no, I can't do this.
Okay, you've got some good questions here. We'll address a few, and then some we'll do offline, but I'll tell you about that as they go. The first, there were a couple of things. Someone said, can you throw more light on praxis? And someone else said, doesn't praxis increase noise in class? And both
if you're doing it correctly, it does.
Yeah, it definitely does. Praxis and teamwork, whether that's in class, like active learning, does increase the noise, but it's productive noise. And we'll be saying, giving you some resources to look at for active learning, but we suggest in class and in workshop active learning exercises are short, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. In this workshop, we're going to give you a 10-minute breakout, but that's because breakouts are a little bit harder to manage. But in person, we can do short activities. So there's a burst of noise, but that noise is productive noise. It's meaningful noise. It's noise of learning happening. And you can monitor that by moving around the classroom and listening in so that you're seeing that students really are engaged.
Let me reword that question. Instead of saying, doesn't it increase that? Yes, it increases the noise level. Let me say, it increases the energy level in the room. Have any of you ever given a lecture, straight lecture, no activity, and gotten the feeling after a few minutes that you were lecturing in a wax museum? You're just looking at listlessness out there, students avoiding eye contact and so forth, a couple of them sleeping in the fourth row. What active learning does is raises the energy level, it gets them active, and now when you stop the activity after 30 seconds, perhaps, and come back, they're with you, they're alive, they're awake. It's worth the noise.
And a couple of you asked, what's the difference between praxis and teamwork? Isn't that the same? Well, praxis can be individual. I may ask students to do something. Well, how do you get this problem started? Do the next step, reflect on this, and then they reflect, and that may be individual. If it's done in a group, you're doing both praxis and teamwork. So those are not necessarily separate. What makes praxis different is you say you're doing something course related and you're thinking about it, getting feedback on it, reflecting on it. Teamwork doesn't necessarily have that reflection piece. We hope it does. Most of the time it may. But those are two different ways. The reflection piece, the feedback and reflection is really important. Somebody mentioned I'm practicing think, pair, share, and jigsaw. And so those are excellent tools for teamwork and for praxis. And if you're giving them things to do that are relevant to the content and relevant to their interest, you're bringing in that as well.
Another good question in the chat is, what's a good method for grouping the students? Good method for grouping the students is say, okay, everybody turn to one or two neighbors, lean over, turn around, do whatever you have to, and then do this activity. What I don't want to do is spend a whole lot of time social engineering, forming groups for these brief active learning exercises in class. Just tell them to work with whoever happens to be sitting next to them, and the group formation can take no more than 2 seconds.
If someone said if the topic's based on mathematics, can we use peer assessment in practice? Absolutely. Peer feedback is feedback that allows somebody to reflect. And so it's great to do that. There are a couple of questions that have to do with the ARCS method, ARCS. If someone would spell that out for us and let us know what that stands for, we can respond to that. That's not a term we know. I want to mention one other thing though, and that is a lot of you have said something about grouping, making groups. How do you form groups if they're doing something outside of class? That's something that we will put into the Canvas site. We will give you a couple of different ideas, some concrete methods you can use for peer assessment of group activity, for how you form the groups. We'll make sure that you have that in the Canvas site because it's really beyond the scope of what we have here.
These are excellent questions. And remember, as we said before, if we don't get to your question here, it will be in the chat. We'll have a transcript of the chat. And on Canvas, we are going to respond to every question that we didn't get to here.
Okay, so ARCS, attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. It sounds to me like it's just a slightly different slant on the same kinds of things. We're trying to get student attention by looking at, they can see our expertise and the relevance of what we're teaching. Relevance is there. They build confidence by actually doing those things we're trying to get them to do, and satisfaction when they can actually do it. So I think they're very congruent. This is just the strategy, the model that we're sharing with you.
Okay, and I'll just make a quick observation here. If you go back to all of the things that you speculated might be the reasons for the poor student evaluations and analyze them a little bit, what you will find is that many of them, and possibly most of them can be traced to failing to observe one of Wlodkowski's 5 criteria. So if you pay attention to them, you're going to avoid a lot of the problems that can possibly arise in classes and in workshops.
Okay, so far in this workshop, we've done some things to address 3 of these 5 conditions. And what we want you to do now is to think about what you've noticed for the conditions that I mentioned here. Put the responses in chat, and in your notes, your handout, page 4 has a space to put some of these ideas that may help you. Before I'm going to ask you at this point to think about expertise of Rich and me. So what has happened either before or during this workshop to help establish our expertise? And while you're writing these, someone said, how can we apply Wlodkowski's model in the online mode? Is it possible? Yes. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll see us having done it in quite a few ways. And we'll talk about that as we go. So someone says, introductions of the speakers, the intro by Krishna, which was lovely and generous, that helped establish our expertise. Applying what you teach is a proof of expertise. So some people call it practicing what you preach. And so we hope that as we go through this workshop, you see us practicing that. Great. Someone said student attention might be the concern. Industry exposure of the teacher. The student attention is a way of saying, we know that students, Rich and I know that it's hard to motivate students sometimes, and that getting their attention may be the most difficult challenge. And someone else talked about the feedback, student engagement. So these are all things, the industry exposure, restating responses from the participants in ways that show that we understand what they mean. And I hope you noticed one thing that we did too, and that is we were not familiar with the acronym ARCS, and we asked. We didn't try to fake it and act like we knew what it was when we didn't. So that's part of expertise too, I think. Linking to the website so you can follow up and see things. Having learning outcomes that are aligned with what we're doing, the session itself, timely and constructive feedback. So you're getting the hang of that notion of expertise, and it'll be hopefully important for you. Some of you have already mentioned some things about relevance of content, understanding how your students, the problems you may have with your students, that says to you, this is relevant. This is going to help me with a problem that I may have. Someone else mentioned back on expertise is ability to address the questions satisfactorily in depth. Let's see. Working together to organize. Good, good. Mentioning that Rich has a background in engineering and Rebecca has education.
Excellent,
Great.
good catch.
Okay. Real-time examples with day-to-day life. So we're trying to bring those things in, current trends, regular interaction with students, all those showing relevance of content.
Let me call your attention to something that I did when I said, have any of you ever given a class straight lecture and noticed that it was like you were in a wax museum, the students were not there with you? I know the answer to that question. Every single person watching this webinar has had that experience. If you're a teacher, you have had that experience. And so I'm bringing something in that everyone that I'm speaking to can relate to. And that is a very good way of establishing relevance.
Praxis is a little bit more challenging to see what we've done, but we've asked you to do some things. We asked you to brainstorm the potential problems in that first exercise where you wrote in the chat why the evaluations of a workshop or a course might be poor. and that you did something, you had reflection, we commented on all the really good responses that you had. So you had a chance to look at what others said and reflect. So praxis, I know it's a weird word, but it isn't all that different from what you know to do already. Someone mentioned the polls and coming back and reflecting on that real-time application.
Every time you ask students to do something in your class or your workshop, you can check off the praxis box. This exercise is for practice, Kirupa just pointed out, and that's exactly correct.
Yes, there are two more that we really have not addressed much yet. One is choice and the other is teamwork, but we're about to. So we're going to give you an opportunity to do that. All right, great. And as we said before, the chat's being recorded, so you can go back and capture some of these great ideas. All right, what we're going to do now is give you an opportunity first to do some individual reflection. And it's kind of unusual to do this in an online environment, but we're going to be quiet for 3 minutes in just a moment. And what we want you to do is to think about a topic in a course that you teach currently, or a 1 to 3 hour workshop you might give. Those of you who did the pre-webinar assignment may have already established a topic that you want to think about. But if you didn't, this is an opportunity for you to identify that and then jot down on your page. It's page 5. We've given you space if you're using that, or just on scratch paper or your laptop. If you don't have the handout open, put your ideas for how you can teach that topic and bring in the meeting of Wlodkowski's conditions. What could you do to establish your expertise, the relevance of this topic and what you're teaching, the praxis, giving them opportunities to practice and reflect, teamwork, working with others, or choice.
Let me, before you start on this, let me just make one little motivational speech. Right now, this and the next one are, in our opinion, the heart of this workshop. We're providing you with a lot of information, and we're hoping that you can absorb it. But what we really want you to do is to leave this webinar prepared to start implementing the suggestions that we're making. And the best way we can think of to do this is for you to do what we're asking you to do now. Think of something that you're going to teach or you're going to present in a workshop, and try to be very specific about how am I going to implement each of Wlodkowski's conditions in this hour of class that I'm going to present, or this 2-hour workshop that I'm going to give. The more concrete you are, the more specific you are about identifying, in order to get relevance, I can do this, this, and this. Here's how I'm going to get praxis and so forth. The more benefit you're going to get out of the hour and a half that you're spending now, and the more likely it is to have a long-lasting impact on your teaching. So take this activity and the next one very seriously.
So we're going to start in just a moment. I've got a timer set on my my phone, and we're going to be silent for 3 minutes, give you a chance. You may not get to all of these conditions. They're not super fast to be done, but get to those that are most relevant for you, that you feel like are most important for what you're going to be teaching. So we're going to be silent, and at the end of this time, we're going to put you into groups to share those ideas. So really take it seriously and jot down those ideas. I'm starting the timer. All right, that was the timer. Not very effectively loud, but you can tell that we got it. I had one question in chat I wanted to highlight. Someone asked, what kind of weight should we give to the different factors? And that may have occurred to you, more of you, as you were working through it. And that is very situation specific. So if I'm teaching an introductory class to my engineering students, I'm going to be super heavy on relevance of the content, making sure that they really know why what I'm teaching them is important, and that action and reflection so that they get that material in their heads. And that may mean that I use a good bit of teamwork. If I'm doing, I may not be as concerned about expertise. If I'm doing a workshop for other faculty or for high school teachers or colleague, boy, you can be sure I'm going to emphasize expertise as well as relevance. So it'd be a little less on relevance, a lot more on expertise.
I would, I totally agree with Rebecca that it's situational, and that how much of each one you do depends on what you're teaching, who the audience is, and so forth. But if somebody put a gun in my head and said, you got to name the top one, I would pick relevance. If you don't establish the relevance of what you're doing to the students' needs and interests and future goals, you've lost them. And no matter how expert you are, and no matter how you run the class, if they don't see the relevance, they're gone.
Okay, what we're going to do now is that Keith is going to send you to small breakout rooms. You should have 3 or 4 people in the room. You might have as few as 2 if somebody doesn't go into that group. Briefly, very briefly, introduce yourselves and select a reporter. We'll ask reporters to do some of the writing in chat or even offering ideas when we come back. And what we want you to do is share and note ideas that you came up with during your reflection for meeting Wlodkowski in for a particular topic, a particular class or workshop that you're going to teach. This is going to be dropped into the chat, but it's also in the handout. So somebody in the group ought to know what the assignment is, but you're sharing what you just did with each other. And then we'll give you a 1 minute warning when it's time to come back. Try to give everybody a chance to share at least a little bit of what they are planning and what they came up with during that last activity. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, I think. Let's see. Okay. And then give Keith a chance to put you into breakouts. Yeah. What we want to do now is give you a chance to think about the breakout session and select as many of these statements as you agree with for yourself. I met new colleagues. I shared my ideas with the group. There was enough time for all of us to share. I got potentially useful ideas. So take just a moment and select all that apply for you. All right, great. Let's keep going, hear from everybody as we can. I know it's a few statements to read, especially if this tiny print. It's not always easy. If your eyes are a little bit older like mine, it's hard to read sometimes. All right, great. Just a few more of you left to respond. Let's be sure we get as many as possible. Okay, we got 3/4 of you done, so let's keep going. Okay, terrific. So you can see, and this is not a surprise to us, that some of you didn't feel like you quite had enough time. That's often true with active learning experiences like we just did with you, because we're trying to get people engaged, but we don't necessarily have time to say everything that, to totally complete the task. So that's understandable. It was also a little bit down on getting an opportunity to share your own ideas and getting ideas from others. So the goal of this was to start establishing our connections. And I think we accomplished that, and hopefully many of you got some new ideas as well. Now is another opportunity to get some new ideas. What we want to do is think about our, reporters, and we want to take just a couple of people sharing your ideas out loud with the group, unmuted. And so if you're a reporter and you want to share one idea, raise your hand, and Krishna,
I will call out the name. Yeah.
Going to respond. If you don't want to raise your hand and you want to put your ideas from your group in chat, 1 or 2 ideas, start doing that now. But we would love to have some hands raised to hear an idea or 2 from groups.
Okay, let's see the hand. Kirupa Priyadarshini. Okay, unmute yourself, please. Come in, Kirupa.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. So we were a team of 4, myself, Hema, and Jyoti. So the discussions that we had, we have ideated the items. For expertise of the instructor, the items that we put together were having multidisciplinary team, certifications of the instructor, showcasing hands-on experience of the instructor, workshops organized or conducted by the instructor in the area, awards received by the instructor. All this will be proof of expertise of the instructor.
Very good.
Great. And I love one of your ideas that had to do with multidisciplinary teaming. That's an excellent tool to get students working or workshop participants working with each other, sharing ideas across disciplines or just interest areas. We'll, when we post some things in Canvas about using teamwork in groups, we'll talk about how you might put that together. Great. Keith?
So next, we'll go to next.
With respect to relevance of the content?
I'm sorry?
I think we can.
We should go to the next. Let's go to the next person. Let's go to the next person.
Yeah, we'll wait. We're just going to hear a few ideas.
Yeah, Devraj, come in, unmute yourself, and then Shambhavi. And that's it.
So good evening. It's Devraj from BMS College of Engineering. I think we were of 3 teams, 3 in the team, Neha and Venkata Raghu. We discussed on 2 things. One is like I think before we start any particular topic, divide that particular topic make it into some subtopics. So students will be in a better position to understand that particular subtopics, make some handouts on that subtopics and give it to them. So they will go through that and they will understand it. And second thing is when we are solving any kind of a problems and all, maybe when you're teaching a particular topic, that particular topic should be solved, maybe a thought in the form of a problem solving techniques. So when solving the problem itself, they'll be able to learn that particular topic. These 2 topics we discussed. I think that this can be made when we are teaching that particular course.
Okay, let us take one more.
Go ahead. And let me say one thing here. This idea of handouts for some content, not always having to cover every piece of content in the class, but getting students to learn some of that content on their own is a great strategy. We'll take
one more
hand.
Shambhavi, that's it. Okay, come in, Shambhavi.
Yes, good evening. I was in group number 27 with myself, Dr. Balaji, both from the information science background, and we also had Dr. Ashok from Hyderabad, who was an English professor. So all of us discussed about our first class. I was looking at data structures, Balaji was looking at machine learning, and Sir was looking at a communication teaching class. So expertise, we thought we could talk about our teaching experience, the industry experience that we bring about, and also about the electives that we offer, and trying to say that it's more sought after in the college so that they get the confidence that we are good teachers. Ashok sir also gave us inputs about how the activities could be done in class, asking students to introduce themselves, where he gets an idea about how good the students are already at communication, and also fine-tune the delivery of the course to make their communication approaches even more better. We had very less to discuss about the choice we could make, but the least that we could do was ask students of how they would want their teaching process to be, the pedagogy for the rest of the semester. Are they comfortable with PPTs? Are they comfortable with, take their opinion to make the teaching learning process or the learning journey for them to be better. So that is the only thing that we had about choice. For teamwork, we could look at an online quiz that we could do individually with Kahoot or any online tool, or a role play according to Dr. Shok, where some terms with respect to communication could be understood. So there was very less on teamwork.
Let us stop you here.
Yeah, I'll
Let me
stop
stop
here.
you here.
Yeah.
And wonderful, all three, such great ideas. Please also, I know we cut you off before each of you, before you finished. So we were getting some wonderful reports in the chat, people putting their ideas from the group. So if you're the reporter, please go ahead and do that as we go forward with the workshop.
And look at the chat, all of you, and if you see an idea that really appeals to you for your own course or workshop, jot it down on your handout or wherever you're taking notes.
All right, great. You guys are really an amazing bunch. It's exciting to work with you. You're going to be the basis of a really wonderful community of practice that we're excited to be a part of because of what you're doing. Okay, what I want to just in our final half hour or 20 minutes, I want to talk about moving from a bunch of ideas into, okay, how do we put that in place? And this part is really about designing a class session or a workshop. And it is about, to some extent, about content. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. The very first thing that we suggest you do, obviously, as you're getting ready to do your planning, is think about putting together a session plan, whether it's for a class or a workshop, and drafting learning objectives for what you want students to be able to do after they've had the class. And you're going to be thinking about content as you write your learning objectives. What is it they should be able to do with that content? And Rich is going to tell you a little bit more about content selection in a couple minutes. But once you've got your plan, then we encourage you to say, okay, how am I addressing the criteria that I've learned about adult motivation? How am I putting those things in place? Do I have some element of choice? Maybe I don't in that particular session, but I have teamwork or I have praxis. So you're thinking about putting those in place. And then once you've looked at everything, you ask yourself, is it okay? Have I done enough to really ensure that the participants are going to be motivated to learn? And most of the time, for most of us, the answer is no. Most of the time we say, I did a couple of things, but I should do more. What else can I get them to do, etc. And once you do that, you revise your plan and then check it again. And this time, with any luck, it's okay, and you rejoice, or you go back and make some second order corrections and additions. But generally, just a couple of times through, thinking about how can I meet those objectives and meet the criteria can really help you.
Just the meta process here. Those of you following our presentation in the handout, we are on page 6 now, where we're summarizing the tips and strategies that come out of everything we've been telling you. All right, so back on content, how do I decide what it is I'm going to include in this class session, in this workshop that I'm doing? And I want to make you aware that there are 2 categories of content in courses and workshops. The need to know information and nice to know information. What are they? There are 3 questions that you ask to determine which category you're falling into. 1, is this material in the course or workshop addressed in my learning objectives? 2, if I'm teaching a course, is this material something that people who are going to be teaching courses that build on mine assume that my students will know because they took my course? And the 3rd question is this material in the course something that I would ever put on a test or a major assignment? If the answer to any of those 3 questions is yes, then it's need to know information. It's information I basically have to get into my course. If the answer to all 3 is no, then it's nice to know information. It's not in my learning objectives. Nobody's going to assume the students know it. I wouldn't dream of putting it on a test, but I like teaching this stuff. It really interests me, or I think my students should be exposed to it. sometime or other in their college careers. Nice to know material is often thought of as irrelevant. This is wasting my time. I don't need to know this stuff, by students and participants. You're violating Wlodkowski's relevance criterion when you present a lot of nice to know information. So the suggestion is, when you're picking, what am I going to cover in this hour or in this workshop? First thing I need to do is make sure I've put in all of the need to know information that I want to cover. And then if there's any time left over, I can throw in some nice to know material.
Okay, what we're going to do now is very quickly review our suggestions, just highlighting those that we think are most important for each of these. The first, if you've got research or career experience with the content, mention it. That's one of many ways to address expertise, particularly valuable when you're doing workshops. If session content is important to students' careers or relevant to students or faculty's goals, interests, concerns, give those specific examples so that you're establishing relevance. Include those individual and team activities that give them practice in the methods to be taught or represented. Remember, that's praxis. If they're doing it individually or in groups, they're taking an action and they're reflecting on feedback or reflecting on it themselves. If they're doing it in groups, it is teamwork.
And you've got, again, all of this material we're presenting now is on page 6 of the handout, these suggestions.
Don't tell students or participants everything. Give them a chance to tell you and then affirm or correct their ideas. That's an action versus reflection. And a little tip for those of you who might do workshops. Sometimes you present data and of why a technique is good, and all of your colleagues are like, but what about that study? Or how was it a controlled trial? Or how did they get this number? We noticed that in workshops we were giving, and we decided to flip it around and ask the participants to come up with the benefits of, in this case, cooperative learning, teamwork. They came up with the benefits in small groups as a praxis activity. And then as we were giving the data, they were high-fiving. They were so happy when they got one of those items. So it really flipped the switch for them.
Before we started doing that, we just presented, here is what the research shows the benefits of cooperative learning are. And we would get all sorts of skeptical questions. Well, exactly how was that research study conducted? What level of significance did the t-test have, and so forth? When instead we ask them to speculate on what the benefits are, and then we affirm their answers, we never got questions like that again.
Also, when you think about your students, they know a lot that we don't. Sometimes we think they have no knowledge. They have knowledge to put down, brainstorm applications, or brainstorm, what happens to fluid when it goes through a pipe. They know some things, and it's great for them to have a chance to express it. And then we add what we know to what they are getting. Whenever possible, and notice we didn't say every time, always, but give students some options about content, research question they explore, their assignment projects, grading, in whichever area you feel you can. Giving them some choice can be useful. Don't have to do it, but they're more motivated when they have some choice. And then for workshops, we encourage you to tell participants not to try too many ideas at once, taking your time, trying one or two, giving them a fair try, keep the ones that are working and change or drop those that don't, and then try a few more. Again, taking all the ideas you've gotten and selecting yourself which direction you think you're going.
Now, I just have a couple of little messages about future webinars. And then in the time remaining, which is about 10 minutes, we'll take questions. If you have questions about anything we've said, put it in the chat, and we'll respond to as many of them as we can. Those we don't get to, we'll respond to in the discussion forum on the Canvas website. So we started out by talking about this webinar series and saying our goal is to establish a community of practice. We've assembled these giants of engineering education, whose pictures you see now. This is one way we have of establishing expertise. The people who are going to be giving you these webinars in the future know what they're talking about. In fact, many of them are famous in our profession for the work that they've done. The topics that these webinars are going to cover include some of the most important critical questions facing our profession and facing our society. How are we going to produce students who meet the needs currently facing the globe, and addressing critical challenges, actively engaging students, how do we use instructional technology, online instruction effectively, and so forth. These webinars will address all of these topics and more.
And we will be modeling in the webinars, just as we've done for you today, how you do these things, how you address these criteria in online environment. Somebody asked about that early. That's what this is. And we've addressed those criteria, and our people coming up will be doing the same thing. Praxis modeled in webinars, teamwork, opportunities to go into breakout rooms to share ideas, and choice, areas to focus on. You don't have to address all of them in your courses, but the more you'll have lots and lots to choose from in addressing the ones that you are interested in. So we're hoping to see this as a real community of practice that we intend to stay involved with, and we hope you will as well. So now let's take some of the questions that you might have written in the chat. And there was one that said, maybe those nice to know things give students more, are the more interesting ones and make students motivated. Well, that's why we didn't say don't ever put in nice to know material, because sometimes that's true. But if it's really the kind of thing that makes the relevance hit home for students, then maybe it is something that you want to include in your learning objectives.
On the other hand, just to give a quick example, in the transport course in chemical engineering, we have these little things called the Navier-Stokes equations, god-awful looking coupled partial differential equations. And we're teaching undergraduates, and there is not a chance that we would ever ask students to do anything remotely like that on a test. Nobody in subsequent courses is going to assume the students know those derivations and so forth. But somehow or other, many faculty members believe, well, the students should see it once in a while. Exposure is overrated. The students are going to tune out, most of them, in the first 2 minutes, and you're spending 40 minutes, 80 minutes or so on these things that they're never going to use. That's not relevant. The students are not going to perceive it as relevant. It's nice to know information, at least you think it is. Don't waste their time. Take that out and put in the things that they really are going to need to know.
Someone asked again, bringing up this idea, particularly in India, I think there's concern, but it may be everywhere. I can't really give choice in assessment. You may not be able to give choice on the final exam, for example, that everyone has to take. That may be a given, but along the way, there are a lot of assessment strategies that we can use with students, doing things like a minute paper at the end of classes to find out what what they think the main point was and what questions they still have, or what's the muddiest point. That's an assessment strategy. Every student responds with what they are having trouble with, and then we're able to take that and modify our instruction. Or giving midterm quizzes that don't count a whole lot or even at all, but give us a really strong sense of how students are doing and lets them know how they're doing. So don't think that we're talking about, you have to turn assessment upside down. You can give some choice and implement some things.
I'll give you a guarantee. this is a really good group we're talking to now. That's quite obvious from the questions that you asked, your responses to what we asked you to do and so forth. I will guarantee you that if we took each one of you individually and said, all right, you've decided what topic you want to cover and what your learning objectives are. I'll give you 15 minutes. Come up with 2 or 3 ways you could introduce choice into this lesson, into this workshop. Every one of you would be able to think of 1 or 2 ideas of introducing choice in the system that you're teaching under. And I could say the same thing about each of the other 4 criteria. Don't assume, well, I'm teaching in a system which doesn't allow you to do this or this. You can think of ways to do this in your system. I promise you.
Another question had to do with, what about millennials? Has this been validated with millennials? This particular model, probably not, but if you look at what we know about millennials, they are much more concerned about relevance than their counterparts years before. Relevance, things that they think they're going to be able to put into practice right away, that is really important to them. And so that's something that you need to make sure to take into account. And all the other elements too, with teamwork and action. These are young people who want to get started, who want to jump in and do things, and their motivation is a struggle for a lot of us. But if we think about relevance and we think about getting them engaged in meaningful ways with praxis and in teams, we're going to see a much higher level of interest. Someone asked, yeah, someone said millennials are my age and I'm an assistant professor. That's true. That's true. The Zoomers may be the ones we're worried about, the Generation Z coming through now. But whatever, this is how people learn and how people get motivated. And those variations between generations just make it even more important to hit these items as well as we can.
We've been told, especially early in our careers when we started doing these workshops, you can't do active learning with faculty members. They'll really resent being told to get into groups and do something. We've been doing it for 25 years. We get really good ratings for our workshops, and we have not received any threatening letters after a workshop.
Someone also asked about, what about different learning styles or different learning strategies that students have? What I would say is that doing things like praxis and teamwork, sometimes we think, oh, what about introverts? Well, everything that we do in a lecture kind of format is challenging for both extroverts and introverts, active and reflective learners, because they're just getting so much information that it's hard to make sense of it. So whether they're extroverted or introverted, having opportunities to think about material, to work with it, have some of your activities individual and some in groups. We're really just balancing the scales. In the past, we've just done so much that's just reflective. And now we're thinking about, let's address all the different needs. And as we think about relevance, there's a large group of students who just need it very, very badly, that relevance and that big picture to understand how what we're teaching them.
Yeah.
Time to wind up.
Yep. All right. So thank you. We hope it will interact with many of you on Canvas, and we will see you at the next workshop. Remember, people can still join. Spread the word.
And thank you so much for being with us. We wish you the best of luck in your future teaching career. We hope that you will choose to join the learning community that comes out of this webinar series. Whether you do or not, we still wish you the best of luck.
Okay, Keith, you got to flash something on the screen. Okay. We have an applause, a little token of appreciation for Rebecca, and a round of applause. And we check it to Felder. And now you know why I consider both of them as our gurus. And they are the role exactly what we need for our mantra. I am teaching, are they learning? Thank you, folks. And we let everybody go, and we will have another session coming up in half an hour. And Rich and Rebecca need a little bit of rest before we come back again. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Namaste. Thank you.